start it. Hello, good morning everyone. Welcome to the second Green Minds webinar in our launch week on the theme of nature-based solutions in a growing city. I'll just let you get settled for a moment and give people a minute or so just to continue arriving, and then we'll get started. Should have thought some background music, really. Okay, well, it's 11:32. We've got an hour, so I'm going to get cracking. Thanks very much for joining us this morning. My name's Zoe Sydenham, and I will be chairing the session today. I lead on the projects and partnerships for the Council's Environmental Planning Service, and I co-developed the Green Minds programme. So I'm really excited to have it come to life and to have so many people joining us today. Thank you very much. So before we start, a couple of housekeeping points. This webinar is being recorded, so we will be sharing it with you all after the event. We've got three inspiring speakers here today. We'll have them do their presentations, and following that we'll do a Q&A. So during the presentations, if you've got any thoughts, ideas or questions, you can post them using the Q&A function, which you should be able to find hovering over your screen. So just post them up and we'll address them at the end of the session. So before I hand over to the speakers, I thought I'd give you a bit of a brief introduction to Green Minds. It's a 3-year programme and it aims to test a systems-based approach to delivering nature-based solutions in Plymouth. We want to put nature at the heart of our decision making. We want to fundamentally challenge our existing attitudes and behaviours, that we are independent from nature, and we want to create green mindsets. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to deliver some on-the-ground projects, such as beaver reintroduction, rewilding urban green spaces, tree planting, and introducing wildlife ponds to manage drainage problems. We'll be experimenting with different delivery and management approaches that support community stewardship and green enterprise. We'll be using science and creative digital tools, including a 3D immersive film, to make everyday nature visible, bringing it to life for more people. And we'll be evaluating our impact and sharing learning through action research studies and providing new resources and tools. Well, we can do this because we've got some great partners on board, led by Plymouth City Council, together with Real Ideas, University of Plymouth, Devon Wildlife Trust, the National Trust, Plymouth College of Arts and the Data Place. And this programme really is different. We'll be the only UK city to secure funding from the European Regional Development Fund's Urban Innovative Actions on this theme last year. And at the end of the webinar, we will share some links with you where you can both find out more information and hopefully get involved. So back to today's webinar, nature-based solutions in a growing city. Well, we felt this was a really good opportunity to bring some experts together to examine the role that nature can play in a city which has an ambitious growth strategy, but also in the context of a climate emergency, budget pressures and a pandemic which is only compounding the existing health inequalities we face in the city. But over the past 6 months, we have all seen how urban parks and green and blue spaces have provided people with much needed space to meet, to relax, to exercise, to play. And our speakers today will set out the issues, the challenges, and hopefully some of the solutions that nature can offer if we ensure it's given the place it rightly deserves at the decision-making table. So to our speakers, we're delighted to have three great speakers here today. Deeney, Head of Environment Planning at Plymouth City Council, Dr Phoebe Carter, Principal Ecologist at Biodiversity Matters and an approved Building with Nature assessor, and Dr Becca Lovell, the lead on investing in nature for health as part of the Southwest Partnership for Environment and Economic Prosperity and lecturer at the European Centre for Environment and Human Health. Quite a mouthful, quite impressive. So first we're going to head over to Kat, who is, as I said, lead on the city's Green Infrastructure Delivery Plan, and is going to take us through some of the great initiatives that Plymouth is working on at the moment. Kat.
Screen.
You're on. If you want to share your presentation.
It should be coming. Can you see that yet?
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Good to go?
Thank you. Yes, go for it.
Good morning, everybody. Obviously, slightly unusual way of doing events in these current times. I can't even see your lovely faces in rectangle boxes today. So, but thank you all for attending. My name is Kat Deeney. I'm the Head of Environmental Planning at Plymouth City Council, and hugely excited about the Green Minds programme because it really takes us on a step of what we've been trying to achieve in the city. We're talking about nature-based solutions in a growing city. So this morning I'll be running through with you what we're already doing in the city and how we want to stretch that, expand it, do more to make sure that nature-based solutions becomes a key part of how cities grow. And I do feel that Plymouth can really lead the way on this, but not just for Plymouth, but as a way of showing other cities and areas in the country how we can align nature to be a partner in what we're trying to achieve for our communities and put it front and centre of what we're doing. So just to start, I thought I'd show you how is our city growing, a map of what we're already trying to achieve. So this is a map of from our joint local plan, showing all the spaces that are allocated or designated through that process. And actually what you can see is a huge amount of it is green. All those green spaces are valued as part of that planning policy document in terms of being allocated for biodiversity, for people, and for the services those spaces deliver. And when you compare that with the brown blobs and the blue blobs, which are housing and commercial, it just shows you the fabric from which we're starting from, that we already have an understanding that these green spaces are essential for the growth of the city. What we need to do now is really work those assets to deliver against some of our greatest challenges that are coming up. We've got a climate emergency and a biodiversity emergency. We need to restore communities after the COVID outbreak, and we need to find new ways of living in a way that actually could enhance people's lives. This isn't about sending us backwards. It's about using nature to grow the city in a way that actually improves people's lives. So what we want to do in growing this and using Green Minds as a way of helping us to identify and do a proof of concept of some of these aspects are to utilise the significant green and blue space within and around Plymouth. We are incredibly lucky with the natural resources that are on our doorstep. We've got Plymouth Sound to the south, we've got Dartmoor to the north, we're surrounded by AONBs, and the city itself contains a considerable amount of green space. What we do need to do is think about utilising these spaces to deliver services strategically, having a holistic, joined up approach. Nature works on systems, and we need to start thinking in that way to really get the benefits from nature, but also to support nature. I think there is a very strong understanding that there are some key challenges facing humanity as a whole, and I think what we can demonstrate by using nature is how we can do things differently in a way that improves people's lives. It's also delivering services which are investable. we've had a look at some of our green spaces across the city, and they are worth a huge amount to us in terms of the services they deliver through health and well-being, through social cohesion, through water management, climate regulation. And actually that means that we need to think about these spaces in the same way that we do other infrastructure in terms of design and delivery, and ensuring that we have a strategy and a plan for how we work with nature. We're not starting from zero. One of the reasons I think Green Minds is going to work so successfully is we've already started on this path. We've got some great examples in the city of where we are working with nature. Hopefully, if you're in Plymouth, a lot of you will have noticed our beautiful wildflower meadows this summer. The park at Derriford has been welcoming people for quite some time now to share nature and to get the children out and to look at the well-being benefits that derives for people. And our parks have been essential during COVID in places where people could get out, enjoy the space, and exercise and restore themselves. So we've got a very good start. What we need Green Minds to do now is to really innovate on what's next. How can we do more? I think it's imperative that we find new ways of doing things, because we cannot carry on as we have done before. The science is clearly telling us we haven't got long to sort out our climate emergency. And if anyone's been watching David Attenborough, he's put a very clear warning of what happens if we don't restore our biodiversity and habitats. So we need to do something different. But change is not always bad, and I think we can think very positively about what we can do to make our city grow and develop in a new way that places nature at the heart for everyone's benefit. So what are we going to do? What does a nature city look like? So, okay, not a landscape architect's drawing, but I wanted to share this because I spoke to my daughter about what we thought a nature city would look like, and this is what she drew. Apart from the orange hair and the very spindly legs that I seem to have in the picture, the key thing she told me is that we have to have trees in cities because it makes people happy and is good for wildlife and stuff. I think what it shows is that children that are exposed to nature naturally have green minds. They integrate nature in everything they do. Every drawing that I see from her and her friends has an active wildlife part as part of the drawing. So it's something I think we naturally have inside us and then somehow gets lost as we grow up. So what we need to do now is bring out some of that thinking and turn it into how do we develop nature into our everyday lives forever and not just when we're 5. Probably a more articulated way of expressing what we need to do comes from Sir David Attenborough, who clearly can do no wrong, and is probably the greatest speaker on the natural world and what we need to do. And I think it really struck me, his words here about nature being our greatest ally. And I think that's how we need to think of it, not separate from nature, not holding back nature or bending it to our will, but actually nature has been delivering a balanced planet since the beginning of time. And what we need to do now is work out how we can work with nature to deliver great places for people to live, to encourage prosperity, and to ensure that the lifestyles that people live align with nature and benefit from it. In Plymouth, this could deliver some fantastic outcomes for people and actually meet many of the challenges we've already got in our traditional way of living and growing. Many of them are very relatable to work that's come out recently around health and well-being and how important these spaces are. It obviously will feed into much bigger challenges around climate change, how we adapt to that going forward, how we manage our water, but it does also link into much wider agendas around jobs and skills and training. There was a report that came out recently that showed that for £5.4 billion investment in nature, it would deliver 200 billion in health and well-being benefits, but it would also deliver 40,000 temporary jobs and 6,000 permanent jobs. So working with nature isn't about not addressing all of the other things that people need, like jobs and prosperity. It's just a different way of doing it. It would also link into things like crime reduction, community safety and active transport, all things that we want to deliver for our communities, We just need to think of it in a different way. So how do we do that? The nature-based solutions approach needs to be citywide. As I said, nature is a system. We need to ensure that that system is functioning very happily, very healthily, because that will actually deliver the services we need as communities. It will help us in responding to our climate issues, it will help us respond to our health issues, and it can also help us in an economic recovery. In Plymouth, we have great plans for a blue arc at the bottom with our becoming the UK's first national marine park. We're looking at a green arc wrapping around the sides of the city with a new community forest. And within the city itself, we have numerous strategic green spaces allocated where we are going to proactively look to deliver biodiversity restoration, places for people and nature to interact, but also to deliver some of the core services we're going to need as we move into the next 10 to 20 years around water management, food production. And I think all of these can be accommodated in our city with the breadth, diversity, and quantity of green and blue spaces we have. We do need to understand the service provisions that these spaces can provide for us, and also to put a value on it. It's been something that's been worked on for some time, and I think sometimes it's been pushed back against, because I think we all agree that actually nature and our environment is invaluable. But ultimately, to fit into our economy, which is around goods and services, we need to understand and value nature-based solutions, and to be able to quantify that in terms of getting investment into these spaces. As I say, nature-based solutions could be part of the green recovery, and the Green Minds project will be an exceptional way of doing some proofs of concept for this, which then could be scaled up and integrated into the development of our city as we move through the next decade. Thank you.
Thanks, Kat. That was a really quite inspiring overview of the opportunities I think that nature can offer for Plymouth, both the kind of, well, all the economic, the social and the financial benefits, which I think is really important to remember. And also I think that sense of urgency, that we do need to act now. It's really promising to hear that the council is backing this and is keen to lead this. So thank you very much for that. We're going to hand over now to Phoebe Carter. As I said, she's the Principal Ecologist at Biodiversity Matters and is an approved Building with Nature assessor. And we're really looking forward to working to ensure we can get accreditation for a number of our Green Minds projects. So Phoebe's going to tell you a little bit more about that.
You want to share your screen, Phoebe?
You're live, Phoebe. Are you okay with your screen sharing?
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's great.
Sorry, it's going absolutely haywire, and I've got playback, so I can hear everything in 10 seconds. So I do. Yep.
That's great. Do you want to? Can you share your screen? That's great.
Yes. I'm sorry, a second. Right. Can you see that okay, everyone?
Can't see your screen yet.
I am sharing. Yeah, I'm having real issues.
Might be a delay.
Can you see it now?
No.
You might have to go on to somebody else.
Okay, that's fine. Why don't we hand over to
Yeah, I'm
Becca
gonna
Lovell for
log
now.
out and try again. I'm having real problems here.
Okay, thanks, Phoebe. Becca, are you okay to
Yeah.
go forward? Great, so let's send you live. So Becca is leading on the Investing in Nature for Health as part of the SWEEP project, and she's going to talk a little bit more about the work she's been doing around health, policy, practice, and the role of investment. Thank you.
Can you see my slides okay?
Yes.
Perfect, thanks. Okay, hi everybody, thank you very much for having me along to speak at this webinar. Oh, hang on. There we go. What I'm going to talk about today is a rapid piece of work that we did for Natural England about a year ago, summarising the evidence that we have about the links between health and well-being and green infrastructure. And the review is to inform Natural England's thinking around the development of this framework for green infrastructure standards, which is going to come soon, apparently. And this is one of the deliverables of the government's 25-year environment plan. So the context of all this, the challenges which we're facing are what we call in academia the wicked problems. So things like high rates of what we call non-communicable disease. So this is stuff like poor mental health, diabetes, cardiovascular disease and so on. And although we've managed to improve health exponentially since the Industrial Revolution, we still have a number of very intractable challenges that we're facing in health. And these non-communicable diseases are related to quite significant inequalities in health and capacity. So between different socioeconomic groups, we find differences in health outcomes, and particularly between more deprived groups and less deprived groups. We know that social health and care costs are rising, and with COVID and everything else, this is only going to become a more acute issue. And on the environment side, we have inequalities in environmental risks. So some socio-demographic groups are far more exposed to the risks of a changing environment and the ways in which we use our environment than other social economic groups. And we know that there are going to be some very significant health impacts of environmental and climate change. So that's a very quick background to where we are thinking about the links between environments and health. So we're very interested in finding ways in which we can modify our environments or use our environments both to mitigate some of these environmental risks to health, but also think about how we can use the environment to promote health and well-being. And one of the sort of promising areas that we have is around this idea of green infrastructure and this sort of associated idea of nature-based solutions. I won't go into the background of exactly what they are. I think probably everybody here knows what they are, but it's how we use our environment to provide the services that we all depend on for our everyday lives in a more sort of equitable environmental and health and societal way. So I'm going to spend the rest of my 10 minutes just talking through the evidence which we summarised on how green infrastructure and nature-based solutions can benefit health and well-being. So the evidence suggests to us that the environments in which we live are fundamental determinants of our health and well-being. So there are direct use benefits. So the way in which we use our environments to be physically active and so on have this very causal link between the places in which we live and our health outcomes. Nested within that, we know that environments and the qualities of environments particularly relate to neighbourhood health and community health. So the sort of state of the environment which we live in is very strongly related to your well-being and your quality of life. But we also know that at a global scale, a much bigger scale, environments relate to health through what we call the ecosystem services. So these are all the ways in which natural environments and the environment's processes relate to and support and protect our health. So this is everything from water systems to sort of the cultural goods as well, such as the value of natural environments in arts and humanities and so on. And the important thing, and the reason I've put these as a little sort of nested diagram, is these aren't divisible. These aggregate up and are interdependent. So we should think about environments having multiple values to health. A green space in a city doesn't just afford somewhere for people to run around and be physically active. It also contributes to neighbourhood quality of life. So a nice leafy green street and a park is manifest through higher house prices and as a sort of an indicator of somewhere that people want to live, and it contributes to their well-being. But also that park contributes to our health through these ecosystem services. So what I was just trying to say is that they're nested, and actually individual spaces have multiple ways in which they relate to our health and well-being. So the evidence suggests that green infrastructure are very effective in their primary aims. As those primary aims are very diverse. It can be stuff like reducing and mitigating flooding, which has a very specific relationship with health through mental health impacts, exposure to pollution and so on. Also through mitigating things like heat island, but also direct impact on providing places for physical activity, those kind of health pathways. We have relatively little causal evidence yet, and this is primarily because it's very expensive and time-consuming to produce causal evidence. So here I'm talking about the evidence which suggests that a park in a neighbourhood is causally related to better health outcomes through various different pathways. But the key thing there is there's a lot of research going on at the moment, which is explaining and demonstrating the different ways in which green infrastructure and natural environments more generally contribute to our health and wellbeing outcomes. But the ways in which we think natural environments relate to health are very plausible, and we're beginning to put together the body of evidence which demonstrates and explains that. So we're starting from that context, thinking that natural environments are good for our health and well-being. And the next question is, well, how do we use and how do we maintain and provide spaces which promote health and well-being? And this was the primary question which Natural England were asking us, basically. They wanted to know what's good or good enough green infrastructure for health and well-being outcomes, but also whether improving the amount and quality and connectivity of green infrastructure can be used to improve people's health and well-being. And here again, the evidence is a bit patchy. Again, this is, very, very big questions. There's lots of different types of green infrastructure, and it's used in lots of different ways in different contexts. And we're also talking about a whole huge range of different health outcomes. I saw a really nice paper the other day about health and well-being outcomes, which they had just collected up 99 of the different things. So, you're talking about a lot of different types of exposures, a lot of different outcomes. So it's sort of partly why we don't have a very complete picture yet. But when we put the evidence together through systematic reviews and so on, we do see a number of principles around green infrastructure for health. And I'm just going to talk through these very briefly. The key thing is greener living environments. The greener the living environment, the better the population health and community health. We know that different sizes, types and configurations of parks and green spaces especially, but also other types of green infrastructure can afford and result in different benefits. It's not enough to just provide some amenity green space. You have to think about the sort of the network of spaces and the way in which they interact to promote different ecosystem services and benefits. We also think that mixed provision of both the publicly accessible spaces, so urban parks, for instance, and private green infrastructure. When you look at a map of green space across the city, I mean, London's a really good example of this. The vast majority of it is private green spaces. And I think there's been a lot of discussion about whether we think enough about the role of those spaces and the way in which we can use them as part of a bigger green infrastructure network to bring about some of the benefits we're interested in. The next big question we always get asked, well, the next question we always get asked is bigger better? So particularly around amenity green space. We know that different sizes and configurations of green spaces afford different benefits within neighbourhoods. Some big spaces can afford, sort of games of football for groups of young men. A small space can be very important for older people, for instance. They can maintain a sense of ownership, they understand who's using it, and they feel safer. So all we're trying to say here is that different spaces have different roles and are used and perceived differently by different people. We think that parks and green spaces which are in close proximity to the home are important. It's the closer it is, the easier it is to use. However, there's a growing body of evidence which suggests both that accessibility, this idea of accessibility, varies, and it's very contextual. So it depends on the sort of the urban form of the place. If there's a great big steep hill between the community and the park, that will affect whether or not people use it. It's also dependent on personal factors. So if you have, a mobility issue, that will affect how accessible a space is. The perception of proximity appears to be very important as objective proximity. Quite often when we're doing this analysis, we just measure a straight line or even a network line between the home of a person and their local space. But it really matters to understand how those people feel about the environment. There may be something that's a barrier between the home and the park which prevents them from using or feeling that that place is close, a busy road, for instance, or a train line. The other part of the accessibility question and proximity question is that people are very selective in their choice of destination, and proximity doesn't appear to be the primary factor. People are choosing spaces depending on what is in that space, how they feel about it, their previous experience of it, and so on. So it's a quite nuanced relationship between people and their places. We also know that connectivity of different spaces is important. And here's a point which I'm going to come back to right at the end, is that we're not only talking about discrete spaces with a sort of a fence around it. A green space can be built up of the private gardens which people walk past, the trees in people's front gardens, the street trees, window boxes. All sorts of different factors contribute to how green a place feels. So just focusing on amenity green space and public space is going to miss quite a lot of the different ways in which people feel about the natural environment in their living environment. But the big thing for us is we think that better quality and better spaces is really very fundamental. There's a very strong relationship between a better quality and well-maintained green space and usage and benefits. And quality is a difficult question. We can think about it both in terms of ecological quality, so the biodiversity of a space, but also we have a sort of social dimension, so things like environmental incivilities and littering and so on. We think that perception of qualities isn't an absolute thing. It's highly variable between different sociocultural groups, and you can just imagine different communities that you work with and how they may respond to different types of environmental features and states and so on. We know that people value the opportunity to experience nature. That's one of the most fundamental important parts of green infrastructure in urban areas is bringing nature to people. But also the quality is very important for maintaining some of those more indirect ecosystem services. Unless well maintained, they won't be able to deliver some of those particular services. Very quickly, I'm going to just ask the question of whether investing in nature is cost effective in green infrastructure. We have a growing body of evidence using a range of different methodologies, which does suggest that investment in green infrastructure and nature-based solutions can be cost effective. It's very variable in terms of what your outcomes are and whether you go about measuring them in a robust way and so on. But we have a number of different methodologies, from social return on investment to modelling tools and the use of quality adjusted life years, which is a very medical kind of way of trying to put a value on it. The different ways in which we can use the environment to promote health are cost effective. And I think this leads us to the final question is how do we make the most of nature and nature in cities through green infrastructure for health and well-being? And as the points were made earlier by Kat, I think thinking about green infrastructure as a system, we shouldn't think about it as discrete spaces or activities, is absolutely fundamental. We need to think about green infrastructure can contribute to bigger objectives. We shouldn't think about green as other. Green infrastructure should be considered as a mainstream option, not as a nice to have if you've got the time, space or funding. It needs to be demonstrated to be comparable to more mainstream grey normal infrastructure. We need to think about and recognise the plurality of meaning of nature, of green infrastructure and so on, between different socioeconomic and social demographic groups. There are some groups who are very marginalised in how we think about green spaces, typically. So teenagers and the ways in which they want to use it are a really good example. Quite often their needs and desires conflict with other groups. We also must think in the longer term. Health outcomes take a lifetime to manifest some of these non-communicable diseases. We also need to think about the attitudes and cultures of use which determine how people feel about places and whether or not they'd like to use them. But we also need to think about how spaces will mature over time. And then finally, it's to be slightly facetious, it's not what you do as such, it's the way that you do it. So it's all very well providing spaces, but it's not necessarily a case of build it and they will come. Quite often, if you're thinking about sort of amenity use of green space, we see the best outcomes where we've improved or provided new spaces. And this has been complemented by social and promotional programs where people have been helped to understand how they can use it. Maybe it's demonstrating of different things that you can do there, help to build that culture of use in different communities. And we know that green infrastructure is most likely successful if there's a good understanding of the local social, cultural and economic context, and where programme managers have taken the desires and perceptions of local communities into account and built it into the provision. We also know if you're specifically trying to use green infrastructure for health outcomes, it's very fundamental to understand the health needs of target populations and the ways in which that green infrastructure could potentially contribute to improving health outcomes. It's also very important, again, specifically around health and the deliberate use of green infrastructure for health, to make those linkages between the provision of the space and then wider networks of social and healthcare services. And again, as just reiterating that point, if it's very specifically around using green infrastructure to promote health, a very sound theoretical understanding of the ways in which the environmental change can influence health is fundamental. And it's partly fundamental to avoid the potential risks of providing green infrastructure for health. And these risks are both direct and indirect. So there's one of the key things that we think about at the moment is this risk of exacerbating inequalities in health through the investment in nature. So a nice example of that is through provision of more green space can raise house prices, pushing out more deprived groups and, you know, pushing out those groups that you're probably trying to help in the first place. And there's good documentary evidence that that happens. We saw that with the High Line in New York, for instance. We also know that new or modifications to the provision and management of existing green infrastructure can, this is my point about gentrification, and the secondary point about this is about unequal access. Quite often new spaces are felt by some communities to be for someone else, and this goes back to my point about the social and promotional programmes. But here's my main point here is that there are also very direct risks to the modification environments through what we call these ecosystem disbenefits, such as increased exposure to pollen or even zoonotic disease. So zoonotic disease is where disease passes between animal hosts and humans. So ticks and Lyme disease is a good example of that. And this is about understanding those risks and managing them quite consciously. So that's the end of my 10 minutes. Thank you very much for listening. I'll provide you with these slides very quickly. I've got a whole load of documents and publications, which if you're at all interested in this, we've got links for them and they may be useful. So thank you again for having me to speak.
Thank you, Becca. That was great. And yeah, we're aware you've got loads of really interesting research and studies that you can share, and we hope to make use of in the programme. So yeah, everybody do look into that. I think what's quite interesting is your reminder, you know, that we need to be mindful. You know, we're working with a system, and there may be some unintended consequences, you know, around what we implement. So I think that's good to remember, and also, you know, good to remember that we don't know everything, and actually involving people and working with people to understand people's needs and challenges is going to be a critical part of our work on this journey. So without further ado, hopefully we'll hand over to Phoebe now. Hopefully we've got the tech working again now.
Hopefully. I apologise for living in a remote place. So right, here we go.
Great. Okay, we can see you, so hopefully we'll be able to get your presentation up.
Right. Can you see that?
No, I'm
Is it
afraid we
shared?
can't. No.
Oh dear. I've shared it on the do apologise everyone. Right. Let's try again. It says share desktop. Can you see anything now? Can you see my slides?
No, we can't. Phoebe, I suggest if you carry on with your presentation, perhaps without the slides, and we'll see behind the scenes if we can get something working. Does that sound okay?
Yeah. Right. Now, can you see that? One last try.
Hang on.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Perfect. Yeah. If you
Right.
want to put it on slideshow.
Apologies, everybody. I have no idea what's going on, really. I'm not a techie person, and I live somewhere without very good internet reception, so I apologise. Anyway, I'm going to talk to you about building with nature. Just to start with, most of the photographs of locations I'm showing you throughout the presentation are from Habitat First group sites. Habitat First are a development company who were the first sort of developers to achieve excellent accreditation with building. So if we must build, then we've got to build back better. We've got to build back green, and we've got to build for nature. Can't sort of keep taking nature for granted and pushing it to one side. We sort of take it away when it's inconvenient, and then we decide that to put in a bit of poor mitigation and stick in a few saplings and a few non-native plants and walk away and feel like we've done something. That's not an option anymore. We can't sort of put nature as an afterthought. It really does have to be integral to any development if we are to meet the housing demands that Boris Johnson wants us to. So the driver of our biodiversity loss is land use change. So we are converting these wild areas for development and for agriculture. And by 2050, 68% of the global human population will be. And the thing with that is that people are already disconnected from the natural world. Meaning that a lot of people in society don't even they don't see nature because it's not part of their life, it's not part of their cities, and if you don't see it, you don't really have any thought about nature and no connection to it. So you turn on a tap and you don't think about where your water comes from. You go to the supermarket and you don't think about where your food comes from. It's just there. And if you don't have that connection to nature, you've obviously got there's no real desire to want to protect it. But making space for nature creates places that are better for people, wildlife, and the climate, as has been covered in the previous talks. Create a space that will bring nature in. Also creates a space that gives back a lot more to us as well. So, building with nature is the UK's mark for green infrastructure, and it takes a proactive approach to nature-friendly development that's sensitive to location and context, and that cares about long-term maintenance and management. So as well as allowing wildlife to thrive, the green infrastructure that you put into place provides places for people to enjoy, and also cost-effective ways to sort of manage water naturally and prevent. But building nature cannot, and it doesn't mitigate the loss of irreplaceable habitat. So it's not a case that you can just go and take a site and strip out everything that's there and apply the building with nature standards and think you've done a good job. Irreplaceable habitats are just that. They are irreplaceable and should be preserved at all costs. But building with nature's got 23 standards in total. So you've got the core standards that create a solid foundation for the delivery of high quality infrastructure through planning and development. So you create these multifunctional networks within your development with inbuilt climate resilience, and you're future-proofing your development. You've got the well-being standards that secure the delivery of health and wealth, and you've got the water standards that effectively manage water quality and quantity, increase flood resilience, and maximise opportunities for amenity. So it's this whole balance again between people and nature, and that's what building with nature does. It really tries to create these places that benefit everybody. And with that, obviously, you've then got your wildlife standards where you're creating places nature flourishes sort of within the boundary and also at the landscape scale. So what's in it for developers? Well, building with nature can help reduce planning uncertainty. You can get a smoother, faster passage through planning. If your scheme is accredited with building with nature, you're showing that you're already thinking better for people and nature. It helps to engage local communities, which is useful prior to public consultation. Again, you're showing that you're not going to be sticking up, concrete and tarmac next to them. There's some thought gone into creating a better place for the people that live there, but also the people who are going to live adjacent to these properties. You're creating the right land for development, and you're attracting consumers who value the benefits of living with nature. You can build climate resilience into the scheme, and building with nature is also a mechanism that secures biodiversity net gain, health and well-being, natural water management, and landscape connections. And it can help you turn ecological constraints into new opportunities to deliver nature-rich development. And that's really important. We've got to stop looking at development sites and panicking that the protected species is in there and looking at the best way to get rid of that protected species. Make it a part of the development if you have to develop there. So what's in it for planning authorities? Well, they can build building with nature into their policy. They can create a shared framework of principles regarding high quality green infrastructure, and they can draw on expertise that may not be in-house. If I give you a couple of examples, West Dunbartonshire Council have included wording from building with nature into their LDP2, and their whole policy document has been accredited by Building with Nature to signal to applicants that the quality of green infrastructure should be a priority in development master. Tewkesbury Borough Council signpost people to Building with Nature as a preferred mechanism for demonstrating independent verification of development. And Cotswold District Council have published a pre-application advice note outlining the importance of green infrastructure and referring to Building with Nature as their preferred definition for high quality green infrastructure design, monitoring and management. Well, what's in it for homeowners? Well, an opportunity to live in a nature-rich environment with all the benefits that brings to health and well-being. So it's estimated that about 2.1 billion could be saved annually through averted health costs if everybody in England had perceived and or access to green space. That's a considerable consideration to take into account. We've also obviously got benefits for nature. We've got opportunities for targeted mitigation of local species of conservation concern. You can create and extend local priority habitats through the development, and that you can work with sort of local authorities to identify, those habitats that are most vulnerable to the development and incorporate them within yours. Again, you've got this enhanced water capture. You're looking for as much permeable surfacing as possible. Sort of prioritise native sort of soft landscaping. You've also got the long-term management of your green infrastructure assets. That's hugely important because it's all well and good ticking a whole load of boxes and saying that you're going to put in lots of green infrastructure, and you do, but then you just walk away. They're not going to retain their functionality forever unless they're managed correctly and sort of sympathetically as well. So Building with Nature is you can go for the design award, which recognises the quality of your master plans. So you're looking for high quality green infrastructure demonstrated at the planning and design stage of the development. Once a phase or your whole development is completed, you can go for a full award. And applications for the full award require the submission of documentation related to the reserved matters applications. And here you're looking for really high quality green infrastructure delivering benefits within the boundary and beyond the scheme, and you can either get good or excellent there, as I said. And the full award requires a post-construction completion visit Building with Nature assessor to check the compliance with the standards, because again, it's all well and good on paper, isn't it, but we have to check that these things are actually being put into place and are functional. So applications are invited at any stage in the development process. You can work with the Building with Nature assessor, you can work pre-application, reserved matters application and construction, or in use, so you can sort of retrospectively go back and look for a Building with Nature accreditation. So this is my final slide, really. The RTPI recently looked at tools for addressing the climate emergency. And if you look at number 5 down on the list, you're building with nature, and that was the only tool that had all 5 of what RTPI were looking for. So we had adaptation, mitigation, justice, plan making, and development management. So it just shows that building with nature sort of is thinking about encompassing everything. Just a very quick introduction to building with nature, but if you have any questions, then please do contact me either after this or within the question and answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Phoebe. That was really interesting. It was it's great to see that some of councils are taking a more proactive approach with developers. Actually, often we find that landscaping gets value engineered out. So it sounds like a really good framework, and certainly we'd like to use it within our Green Minds project. So we've got, thank you to all our speakers, we've got some interesting questions coming through. So I think I'm going to have a look at those and address those. Right, so Becca, we've got one specifically aimed at you, asking about whether you've got any tips on evaluating the engagement with these sorts of projects, and how can we show the impact on people as well as biodiversity?
Hi, it's a really good question, and if you could somehow send me your email, my emails, I'll put it on the things I share with everybody. But I can share some really useful resources with you, which give you some guidance on how to do different types of evaluation. But there's some basic questions you ask yourself is, how much capacity have you got to do evaluation? What is it that you want to know? Who are you going to speak to with that piece of evidence? Is it, are you taking to a funder or to a health board? So questions like that to inform how you go about doing the evaluation. So I can share some really useful things in there for you, but there are some very basic principles of evaluation, which are knowing what it is that you need to know, working with the communities of interest, using robust tools so people have confidence in the outcomes that you're interested in. And I think in terms of what you might want to evaluate, it's very broad and very plural. And again, it goes back to the question of why you want to do evaluation, but there are sort of intermediate health outcomes and behaviours, so amount of activity in the space, how people feel about the space, through to usage of the space. So lots of different things that you can evaluate and use to demonstrate how effective the thing that you've done is. But I can share a load of really useful resources on that.
Thank you. Yes, we're going to be launching our Green Minds website this week as well, so it'd be great if you're happy we can share some of those resources there as well. Thanks, Becca. So we've got another question here on how can we incentivise nature-based solutions within existing urban areas? For example, not just new developments, but for the existing areas as they stand. I don't know whether Kat, you want to have an opportunity to answer that, and then whether Phoebe's got any comments on perhaps how do we hold developers to account when this is a sort of voluntary accreditation?
Thanks, Zoe. It's a really good question. I think when we get the best results around nature-based solutions or greening areas, it's because people believe in the outcomes. So they understand why they're having to do it, that it's actually a benefit for the community. So if you're a developer, perhaps it helps sell your houses because people want to live there, or other initiatives around building employment is because actually the employees are usually healthier if they've got somewhere green and pleasant to go on their breaks and exercise. So I think the biggest incentives are probably trying to get people to believe in this and see the outcomes. We're now able to value some of this, and we know some of the bigger companies particularly are putting parks within their office areas where they're developing them because they now see the value of this. So I think in new developments we can definitely show people the value that will be delivered by spending what's relative to other infrastructure like roads fairly cheap, will deliver huge benefits. I think in existing urban areas, it is more challenging. You've already got an urban form that you need to change, but that can be changed. It's something we're looking at with Green Minds is how we rewild. But again, we need to take people on that journey with us, so it doesn't look like, you know, we're just leaving the grass or we're changing what they see outside their front door without them understanding why and seeing where the benefits are. So I think all of this, I think it's why Green Minds is so important, is about getting people to understand why we're trying to make these changes and how it will hopefully benefit them, the city, and ultimately the planet.
Thank you. Yeah, it very much goes back to bringing people along with us.
I'm totally in agreement with that. Sorry, I'm in agreement with that, and it's totally down to the communication and understanding, isn't it? Trying to get everybody to you know, what you're doing, and then communicating those changes, because as you said, we know the benefit of a wildflower area, but that wildflower area gets to a point where it looks a bit strapped at the end of the year, and then people want it mown down because they're used to having a lawn that's sort of, you know, very, very flat and very tidy. So it's all that communication with people. A lot of the stuff that I'm involved with, when we do put mitigation sort of retrospectively, so perhaps you go back and you put in bird boxes, and we did it with house martins. We sort of retrofitted sort of 60 house martin boxes on to houses. We now have about 250 nests every year with them coming back. But when you start that communication, it's putting up signage so that people understand, you know, what you're doing and why. So there's this, they can see the whole process, and then they can see hopefully the benefit at the end, that you've got this increase in biodiversity that they're part of as well.
Thank you. So Becca, we've got a couple of questions. I'm going to combine them, I think, and head them over to you. So firstly, there's a really good point that you made around gentrification of an area that we've greened. You know, how do we want to improve the opportunities to interact with nature across the whole city, and we know that will have a big impact on health inequalities, but actually how do we avoid pushing those people out that we wanted to engage? And I think the other thing that you mentioned was around private green space. So obviously as a council we're mostly focused on the land that we manage, which is public land, but actually what part can we play in supporting people to manage their own private green spaces more sustainably?
So with the first question, I don't have an answer, and it's like a lot of the questions we have around health inequalities. It's one of the most knotty problems that we face in health promotion is how do you improve the health of one group without improving the health of another group and exacerbating or widening that gap. It's a very sort of moral and ethical issue. And it's the same with how we design our living environments. Some of the things that we can do can exacerbate those gaps, even if they're done with the best intentions and the best wills around. And it's something which people are just turning their minds to. We've recognised this effect for a long time, but we don't have the answers at the moment. There's a movement which is called "How much green is enough?" But it's, you know, when you start asking that question, is you start asking questions. Well, why don't all communities deserve enough green, green living environments? Are we really going to put a threshold on how much green to stop these negative consequences? And I think part of that, the solution is probably going to lie in equitable distribution of spaces and environmental bads between different communities, not having green neighbourhoods and not green neighbourhoods that cause some of these disparities. And I do fully recognise that that's a bit of a utopianist approach to this. Of, you know, everywhere should be lovely, but we don't necessarily have the money or the funds to do that. So it is a problem which we're facing. We're aware of it, but we don't necessarily have the answers to it at the moment. In terms of the second question about gardens and green infrastructure strategies, and I fully take your point that quite often domestic gardens, there's very little oversight of what happens in them, and it's post-planning, very little control. But when we're thinking about it from a health perspective particularly, it's very useful for us to recognise the whole system and network of green, regardless of who owns it. in terms of some of the ecosystem services, for instance, in terms of their contribution to our health. It does become an issue when you're thinking about how to think about those spaces and how you might want to use them more effectively or modify them, for instance. What are those levers that you can use? And yes, some of those planning and policy levers aren't applicable to private spaces, but there are other ways in which you can try and get people to do the things that you want to do through messaging campaigns. The RHS, for instance, has been doing a programme up in the north of England around trying to encourage a community to green the front gardens and the fronts of their houses as part of a community health programme. So using sort of promotional messaging, small incentives to try and nudge people into doing the things that you want them to do, even if you can't sort of statutorily obligate them to do it. So I think, you know, it's important to recognise all these different spaces and contributing to green infrastructure, but then when you're thinking about it as a sort of administrative system, then yes, there are differences between different sort of legal ownerships of spaces.
Thank you. Yes, nature knows no boundaries.
No.
Right, well, we're coming to the end now. Just we're at 12:30, so I'm going to finish the questions now. Though we've got a bunch coming through, which I think we can look to address through some of the work on our website, which will be great. Thank you, huge thank you to our speakers today, providing us with some really thought-provoking and inspiring presentations. A huge thank you to audience for listening and sharing your questions, and also to my colleagues who I have been working tirelessly in the background to sort out tech and get the whole event set up. I just want to say that we've got some great work going on in Plymouth already, and I think these presentations and really highlight that we've got a really strong platform to which from which we can build a good green recovery from. So let's take this forward. So there are more things happening this week. Don't leave us, come back. We've got a few more webinars up there, Beaver Fever, Living Lab. You can come along to Central Park and try out some funky new digital and tech stuff, bring the kids, and please get in touch with us. We're on social media. We'll be launching our website this week, and we'll also be sending out the webinar recording, but also a short survey back to you when you've had a time to reflect on the presentation. Please do fill that in and send that back. So I'm going to sign off, say thank you very much, and go out and enjoy some wonderful nature. Bye-bye.